This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. What do you guys want to talk about?
Well, got some stuff to talk about this weekend. It was an interesting weekend, that is for sure. A very WWF/WWE inspired weekend. Guess it's just kind of how things played out. But we're going to talk about some stuff, including the WWE Crown Jewel event, which I was very hesitant to talk about to begin with, just because of how little intrigue I had into it going in. But we are going to discuss some of it because there were a few things of note, including that main event. Good Lord. Before we get to that, though, let me do my little brief introductory plug for the show. This is the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast. Welcome new and returning viewers. We are on YouTube and Rumble every Monday and Friday for new content, so whether you're watching on either platform, if you're watching on YouTube specifically, make sure you subscribe, like the show, leave a comment, and make sure you have that bell icon turned on. Notifications are probably the best way to catch up on when our videos go up each week. We are consistent with uploads. The timestamp of when they actually go up is questionable. It fluctuates, but that's what happens when you have a busy schedule. But we do try to get them up in a timely manner, so I do my best. Anyway, before we get into the Crown Jewel show, which is kind of the meat of the matter for this particular podcast episode, figured we'd get the prelim stuff out of the way first. We are going to continue in our retro review series extension, specifically targeting WWF Raw from this week in history. This would be the November 8th, 1993 episode. So we are in... where the hell did they say they were this week? Bushkill, Pennsylvania. And I will be the first to say, as somebody who has resided in Pennsylvania my entire life, I had never heard of any place in PA called Bushkill. Turns out it's an incredibly small township in Pike County, consisting of an approximate population of around 8,000 people. About a quarter of whom are probably in attendance for the show. Something tells me this wasn't a particular good region of the country to draw wrestling fans in for. No idea who decided on this venue of location to host Monday Night Raw from, but give it a solid C- for the effort. Not that it was a bad crowd or anything, just of all places for them to decide to host Raw from, someone woke up one day and said, "How about Bushkill, Pennsylvania?" Talk about throwing darts at a map. Of course, Vince was probably like, "Yeah, pal, Bushkill, Pennsylvania. That's such good shit." Anyway, we open here with a pre-tape package for the Ludwig Borga-Scott Steiner showdown for later on, followed by Bobby Heenan in a double-sided parachute, announcing that he was going to be flying to the Riddick Bowe Evander Holyfield fight with Daredevil Dennis from complete opposite ends of the venue, to which Vince informed Bobby that A, the fight was already over, and B, Daredevil Dennis was arrested on the scene, to which Heenan responded by going, "Well, I didn't know him that well." Then we had another hotline plug, where the fans got to vote for Pierre's opponent on next week's Raw. I believe the options boiling down to the following candidates: the 1-2-3 Kid, Doink the Clown, Marty Jannetty, or Lex Luger? Hell of a set of options there. I wonder which one the fans were going to settle on. Personally, I'd probably have voted for anybody but Lex, but, well, story context. Anyway, we went straight into the Ludwig Borga-Scott Steiner match, which by the end probably ended up being the best Ludwig Borga match I've ever seen. It was also peak Macho Man here on commentary, because we had an ongoing story with him throughout the show, where he was anticipating getting physical with Crush after what had gone down in their little face-to-face a few weeks back. And from the onset of the show, Savage was red hot, promising that if anybody got in his way of trying to go after Crush, he'd basically put them into a coma, up to and including President Jack Tunney, which was apparently all right for you to do in WWF around this point. You could just outright threaten the boss and receive no repercussions for it. Perks of being a babyface, I guess. Anyway, well, it is a Scott Steiner match, so you know he's probably going to be picking dudes up and throwing them around at various points. And we had a near-death experience early on here, where Scotty went to give Borga an overhead belly-to-belly throw and barely missed dumping Borga right on the back of his neck. Now, of course, this was a match between two of the guys in the upcoming Survivor Series match, so you knew the other teammates were eventually going to get involved. We had the Quebecers coming out before the break to try and talk strategy with Borga on the floor, followed by Rick Steiner coming out a little later on. The longer the match went, too, it became more and more apparent how blown up Borga was getting, whiffing bumps on drop kicks, running like the $1 Million Man toward the ropes. In fact, that might have not had anything to do with Borga actually being blown up. I figured the guy just didn't know how to take an actual drop kick. Seriously, every single time Scotty went to give him one, he was either out of place for it or just took a horrible bump for it. And eventually they build to a spot here at the end where, completely at random, for no apparent reason that I could think of based on what happened during the match, Rick Steiner just decided to get on the ring apron and start trash-talking Borga in plain view of Earl Hebner. And evidently, while the Quebecers tried to distract Rick on the floor, Borga grabbed Rick by the neck and yanked him into the ring, wherein Rick immediately gave Borga a belly-to-back throw for the DQ finish, while the Quebecers ran in for the beatdown. But let the record show here, even though the heels were minding their own business on the floor, the babyface just randomly decided to stick his nose in their business, and end result, he got his ass kicked for it. I mean, I know the gimmick for the longest time was that Rick Steiner was not the brightest bulb in the drawer, but, I mean, come on now. Seriously, who agented this finish? But eventually the Steiners ran off the heels, wherein Howard Finkel then announced that the match was a double DQ, which made zero sense from a booking standpoint, because Rick was the one that got involved in the first place and dropped Borga on the back of his neck with a suplex before the heels ever attacked Scotty. So that was kind of a bullshit call. Even Bobby Heenan pointed out how little sense it made. Then we moved on to another Double J pre-tape, pulling up at the abandoned Ryman Auditorium, home of the Grand Ole Opry in his vintage 68 Cadillac, here to once again expose the corrupt nature of the music industry, or something to that extent. Moreover, it appeared that he was there to compare the dead atmosphere of the abandoned building and the country music singers to another dead guy who happens to be working in the WWF, The Undertaker. As if they were actually going to ever book an upper mid-card program in the WWF between Double J and The Undertaker. Anyway, basically just said they were going to rename the WWF the Double JF, by the time Jarrett runs through everybody on the roster. So, oh, and of course we can't forget, that's JEFFJARRETT. That's Double J, Jeff Jarrett. And right before they cut to break, Vince plugged Crush in action for later on, to which the Macho Man, in about a 5-second fit of rage, did his best Tourette's guy impression, promising to end Crush's career. Highly comical. Then, Men on a Mission killed 2 job guys in a short squash, the only thing of which I noted was the following statement: "Whoop, there it is." It's pretty much all you need to know about that match. Followed by another Survivor Series card update with Todd Pettingale. There were a couple matches that we plugged during the recent Raw reports. The obvious double main event in 93 was the All-Americans Foreign Fanatics 4-on-4 Survivor Series match, consisting of Luger, the Steiners, and Tatanka versus Yokozuna, Borga, and the Quebecers. However, here, they told us to stay tuned for the upcoming WWF Superstars show, where they would announce who would be replacing Tatanka on the babyface team, since he was still out selling the injury after Yoko gave him the bonsai drop. They also plugged the Hart family versus Jerry Lawler and the Knights, a match that I am not looking forward to reviewing, but, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. We also had this recently booked for the card: Razor Ramon, Kurt Hennig, the 1-2-3 Kid, and Marty Jannetty versus Adam Bomb, Diesel, IRS, and Rick the Model Martel. Yeah, that was a match they came up with for this 1993 Survivor Series card. Talk about drawing 8 random names out of a hat. Still, it was not as random as this match. Bastion Booger, Bam Bam Bigelow, and the Head Shrinkers versus Doink and 3 Doink Decoys. Another upcoming catastrophe in the waiting. 93 was a rough year, folks. Let's just be glad we're almost through with it. Not that 94 was much better, but Jesus Christ, this card. Probably the only good thing on that entire show, looking back with modern eyes, was the Rock and Roll Express Heavenly Bodies match for the Smoky Mountain Tag titles. So thank God for Cornette, because he probably single-handedly saved that Survivor Series show from being an all-time clunker. You know what wasn't an all-time clunker, though? Undertaker encouraging people to drink responsibly. In kayfabe. My man. Only Mark Calloway could do a commercial on drinking and driving in character and make that shit work. He's the best, man. What can you say? That was followed with Rick Martel versus John Paul. Apparently, John Paul was going through his Book of the Apostles when he came up with his ring name. That, or he was a big Beatles fan. I guess George and Ringo got the shaft. Anyway, they wrestled for a few minutes, and Martel won with the double-leg Boston Crab. Absolutely nothing else to say about it. Finally, though, after about 40 minutes into the show where, well, as you could probably tell by our reporting, pretty much nothing of note happened, we got the big angle for the program. We made some passing jokes how Randy Savage was off his rocker through this entire show, vowing to get his hands on Crush whenever he came out for his scheduled match. Problem, though, is that contractually, Savage is not allowed to get physical with any of the wrestlers unless he's actually booked to compete. And because Savage was assigned for commentary duty this week, Vince was trying to restrain the Macho Man from actually getting involved with Crush. And that went about as well as you would expect when a crazed, out-of-his-mind Randy Savage is out seeking blood, because he ends up throwing Vince McMahon onto the ground while he was trying to hold him back, immediately going after Crush in the aisleway, and they both get into a brawl. That also might have sparked the first bump we have ever seen Vince take on television up to this point. Wow. Just wait till he started taking stunners a few years later. Boy, howdy. By the way, more to come on the Crush Savage brawl in a little bit. Before that, though, we had this little buffer match with Bob Backlund and Barry Horowitz, which actually probably could have been a fun little match if the attention had not been diverted from pretty much anything they did. Because after the Crush Savage fight, the only thing people really wanted to see was Savage get his hands on Crush again. And while the two are wrestling here, Macho Man comes storming back out to the commentary desk, huffing and puffing, calling out Bobby Heenan like a wild man and saying that no one should ever bet against the Macho Man. And, well, I'll say this first of all. I have no idea how this was taped or how they went about formatting all this when they were putting the show together, but I would not be surprised at all if they legitimately filmed the Crush Savage attack in the back directly before sending Savage back out to the desk here. Because that man was breathing heavily and sweating profusely when he came out. So it was either the former or Savage is just the best performer in the history of wrestling. Both of which are entirely possible. And evidently the attack was soon back on, because they put the camera back on Crush's locker room door in the back while the match was still going on, and Crush comes barreling through. Meanwhile, officials and ring security are trying to restrain both of these guys. And that was the cue for Savage to take off and go after Crush to meet him halfway. And then we come back from break where Vince finally informs us that order had been restored, allegedly, and Savage had been barred from the building. It was a fun little brawl sequence. By today's standards, you see this kind of Crash TV stuff so often anymore, it doesn't really mean a whole lot. But back in 1993, when this stuff was kind of rare, sure, it actually got over like crazy with the people watching. Looking back, it was really the only notable thing on the entire show, at least when it came to hard-selling story advancement. The only other thing of note here before we wrap up the report are the votes that came in. And after the long-awaited suspense of finding out who Pierre is going to be wrestling on Raw next week, coming in at 62% of the vote, it appears that Lex Luger will be the man wrestling Pierre. Damn. And all this time I thought Marty Jannetty was going to run away with that match. Boy, was I fooled. Well, anyway, that show sucked. So how about we talk about something a little more interesting? Y'all ready to get oozy? I know Sami Zayn was. Tell you what I wasn't ready for, though, was the way they opened this particular episode of SmackDown. This Liv Morgan, Sonya Deville no disqualification match. Good God in heaven. Well, I guess I'll start with the positives. This won't take long. Sonya Deville has a badass look. In an ideal world, she would have probably been the chick to put over in this kind of environment, since she actually looks like a grown female that could beat the shit out of anybody. Instead of them trying to artificially bowl over Liv Morgan like she's someone anyone would actually take remotely seriously in a legit fight. And we'll get to the finish, but like I said, putting over Sonya's look. That is about where the good critiques stop when it comes to this segment. Because this segment was ass. Literally in the first minute of the match, what is the first thing the girls do in this no DQ match? They roll out to the floor, they go underneath the ring, and what do they grab? A fucking kendo stick. The single most overused weapon in the history of blunt instruments in pro wrestling. The most absurd outlaw weapon next to the toilet seat. And I know it's the old school fan of me talking when I say this, but This is also why I pretty much grew up loathing and despising everything about ECW, because I knew all these bad habits would end up trickling off and rubbing off on the boys and girls down the road. I've always been of the mindset that if you're going to involve weapons in a wrestling match, especially crap that you put underneath the ring, it's got to be believable. It's got to be stationary equipment that you would actually find underneath a wrestling ring during a show. A water bottle, a toolbox, a wrench, pliers, something that would be handy in case you needed to fix the ring mid-match. Why the fuck would you ever have a kendo stick underneath the ring unless you knew it was planted there? It is so stupid. And I can't believe after all these years, they're still doing this garbage. The next time I see a kendo stick used in a no DQ match again, it'll still be too soon. Especially when the girls are doing it. God, it looks phony as all get out. And of course, the fact that they're using weapons in this match, period, immediately lends the fans to start the "We Want Tables" chants. Because modern fans are fucking morons, and it's the only thing people actually care about anymore. They don't care about faces actually getting revenge on the heels anyway. They just want to see people car crash through tables because wrestling is stupid. Speaking of stupid, how about Liv Morgan attempting 2 suicide dives out to the floor and nearly crippling herself after catching her feet on the ropes? Because she had no idea how to actually hit the move safely. Whoever signed off on Liv doing that should be immediately fired. And of course, at the point Liv broke out the table from under the ring, I basically threw up my hands and said, fuck this. So I fast-forwarded through the rest of this thing to see Liv hit Sonya with the worst finish of 2022 on a set of chairs for the pin. Because whatever brain trusts are in charge of booking Liv Morgan and Sonya Deville right now, someone decided that out of the two of them, Liv is the one that should get put over in the finish. All 5 feet, 110 pounds of her. Meanwhile, Sonya, the one who actually looks like she could take most of the girls on a roster in a legit fight, of course, they job her out. So that segment can go piss up a rope. That was followed with another girls segment in the back with Emma and some other completely unnamed girl who I guess we were all just supposed to know. Never had a graphic shown. I think it was Xia Li, but don't hold me to it. Anyway, she tried to cut a promo on Emma, but Emma punched her in the mouth, and that was pretty much that. I guess they're going to feud now. 20 minutes into the show, and the only thing we have seen on the program up to this point is tits. And we killed about 3 more minutes of airtime with a bunch of Crown Jewel infomercials. Finally, getting to something worth actually devoting attention to. My main man, Eli Drake. Or LA Knight, whatever he's going by these days. And while the idea of him feuding with Ricochet isn't exactly the most enticing thing in the world, it is far and away better than wasting Knight with suspect sissies in feminine attire, or whatever they were doing with him prior. I much prefer grown adult LA Knight, who actually looks and sounds like a man, coming out admonishing the girl ring announcer for screwing up his hometown a few weeks back and calling Ricochet a gymnastic jerk-off. God, what a promo that guy is. You know, now that I think about it, he is probably the closest dude in the business today that I would actually pay money to see go toe-to-toe with MJF on the mic. A good old-fashioned heel versus heel showdown of one-upsmanship. Who can outclass the other on the stick? That actually would be really interesting to see. In the meantime, though, I guess I'll just sit back and watch LA Knight do his thing in WWE. On the other hand, Ricochet can keep doing the gymnastic routines, evidently living up to his moniker of being a gymnastic jerk-off. And like I said before, I don't have anything against Ricochet necessarily. I've actually enjoyed a handful of his NXT matches in the past, but, I mean, you can't compare him to LA Knight in the ring. It's apples and oranges, dude. I mean, it suffices for what it was designed to do. LA Knight is a great seller, so he fed for a lot of Ricochet's flashy offense early on. All the while, Wade Barrett was calling out the previous creative regime for going out of their way to fuck up LA Knight's original gimmick, not even trying to mask how horrible an idea it was. Generally everything they did here was pretty basic and simple. LA Knight was a good old school heel, so he worked that to his advantage. Good facials and mocking taunts. Ricochet made a nice little babyface comeback at the end. Tried to set up Knight for a big top rope splash, but got cut off so they could trade roll-ups near the ropes. And evidently, LA Knight was able to grab said ropes and use the tights to steal the win over him. It wasn't glossy, but got the job done. It's the exact kind of thing you would expect a character like LA Knight to do when he was desperate. So, I was cool with this. Again, I don't think they need to stretch out this program and make it a long-term thing, but using it to elevate Knight up the card, perfect way to get him over and establish him with the audience. And trust me, the more promo time they give him from week to week, the better. So, thumbs up to all this. Same goes with the deal here in the back with the Bloodline. Once again, Jey Uso continuing to defy Sammy's orders and try to take matters into his own hands, saying that they're one step closer to breaking the record of the longest reigning tag champs in history, while Sammy's trying to encourage Jimmy and Jay to hang in the back and not get physical before their title defense with the Brawling Brutes. Jay's talking about how they're going to go to the ring to settle some issues right now. And of course, they storm off while Sammy's covering his face and expressing concern, made better by him uttering the following phrase, "My dogs." And everybody in the audience popping for it because it pretty much came off exactly how you would envision Sami Zayn saying that phrase. Very Caucasian sounding. And I'll say this. When it comes to the whole dynamic of Jey Uso and Sami in this Bloodline story, there are a lot of different paths they could go. I do wonder if it would be worth them shooting an angle in the payoff where Sami ends up costing the Usos the tag titles like right before they're about to break the New Day streak. I actually think that would be a really damn good story advancement if they're trying to drive a wedge between Sami and the rest of the Bloodline for a later date. But on the other hand, I also wonder if maybe they're going too hard with the tension story between Jay and Sami. Like, it's one thing when they were teasing it periodically in the early stages, and now it really seems like they're going to the well on this with every single show. I think we've already kind of established that Jay's got a problem with Sami because he doesn't trust him. Now I'm starting to wonder, is it one of those things where they're starting to beat a dead horse by having to constantly remind us of it on every show? Like, you don't have to have Jay and Sami get into an altercation on every single episode of SmackDown. Like, you can sparse those things out. Maybe it's just a nitpicky thing on my end, but it came to mind while I was watching this. Everything they're doing with these guys is fantastic. I have no complaints about the story or the direction they're going. I just don't think they need to bicker in every single segment on SmackDown. Give it more of an organic feel. Save the blow-ups for when they would actually matter. That kind of thing. Kind of like what they're doing with Bray Wyatt. Maybe. Maybe not. I actually have no idea what the hell they're doing with Bray. Look, I'll say this. If wrestling doesn't work out for Bray Wyatt, I would absolutely nominate that guy to star in the next big horror film they decide to shoot. That guy is... He's incredibly gifted. I'll tell you what. I still have absolutely no idea what the fuck he's talking about or what I'm intended to take away from it. But again, I'm hooked. He's a very captivating storyteller. Apparently, it's not so much of the split personality gimmick they're going with. Now they're basically just going all in with Bray being unhinged and off his meds. I guess it's like a borderline schizophrenic idea they're running with, which could probably work if they don't get too silly with it, which I'm sure they will once they introduce Uncle Howdy into the fold. But, the deal they shot here with Bray getting confrontational with a tech guy for trying to wrap up his segment in the back after he literally just got done talking about how he doesn't like being interrupted. I mean, I sure as fuck wouldn't want to get confrontational with Bray, especially after he says he hates being interrupted. Doesn't seem like a wise move. Again, I have no clue what they're going for with all this or where it's leading to. And the weird, spooky tech glitches where they're putting up all the Halloween junk while Bray's cutting the promo. I mean, hypothetically, I should be calling this out for being overly processed and phony in presentation. Once again, though, I'm going to reserve judgment on hating it until we actually see how they pay it off. I'm sure I'll hate it in the end, but I'm going to roll with it until we actually see what they do. So after that, we had the Usos coming out for a talk with the New Day. And I'm just going to cut and paste everything I've ever said about the New Day right here and right now so we can just be done with it. I am actively boycotting anything on this program involving the New Day, even if it involves them going toe-to-toe with the Bloodline. I have hated this gimmick since the day they started airing the goofy vignettes for it like 8 years ago. And even though I may like Kofi and Xavier personally, I think those two are great talents individually. I've had nothing but good things to say about them in the past. But I'm sorry, man. Slap a pair of rainbow tights on them, give Xavier a trombone, have them flipping pancakes and acting like underage children for the better part of a decade. I can't take it seriously. I've always thought the New Day gimmick sucked, even before the people started chanting it in live venues. I get they were extremely over at one point. I get the appeal if you were a big fan of the guys in the group and wanted to see them get a push. But again, the whole concept of the gimmick, I thought it was trash since day one. And the fact that I am still looking at it in the year 2022 is enough to instantly tune me out the minute I see this god-awful stuff on television. Doesn't even take that long. I don't even need to see them on television. Just hit the theme music. I just skip over it. I'm done with it. Now, I passively watched the Shayna Baszler-Natalya match while I was taking a dump on the toilet. Big fan of Shayna. Talked about that before. I thought she had a heck of a run in NXT when they were booking her as the Unstoppable Champion a few years back. Natty, again, nothing against her personally. Can't really say she's someone I get excited about seeing wrestle anymore. She's kind of been overexposed for years now. Good wrestler, and she's always been a solid hand for the division, but she's another textbook example of how can I miss you when you never go away. She's been around for years. She's been flipped between face and heel more times than the Big Show at this point. I just don't really get a whole lot of watching her work at this stage. It was a fine little TV match for what it was. Shayna went over with the Karafuda clutch. Really nothing else to say about it. It was better than that abortion of a no DQ match with the girls in the opener. They also got a hell of a little heat angle out of it afterwards where it looked like Shayna actually legitimately busted Natty's nose when she kicked her with that knee shot. Hopefully she didn't break it, but goddamn that looked nasty. I appreciate they're seeming to take Shayna seriously again from a creative standpoint. She's been wasted potential on the main roster since the day she showed up and bit a chunk out of Becky Lynch's neck. Someone I thought should have been a much bigger deal on the main roster than she ended up being under the Vince regime. But knowing Hunter was always a big advocate of her work in NXT, it's nice to see she's actually going to get a fair shake this time. And I think pairing her with Ronda is actually a good move. I could see that being a lead up to a story later on where maybe Shayna eventually turns on Ronda and that kind of sets up a little program with them heading into next year. I mean, if anyone's a legit enough athlete or a fighter to be able to have a credible match with Ronda, Shayna's not a bad option. She's a hell of a lot more believable than Liv fucking Morgan, tell you that much. That was followed with a quick little Braun Strowman deal where he plowed through a bunch of dudes and wrecked shop, killing MVP in the process with a series of running power slams. It's crazy, but it's almost like this is the one effective booking strategy to actually get Braun over, smash him over dudes, and have him lay waste everybody in his path. Not like that never worked at any other point in the business or anything. Now, granted, it was all to set up Omos and Strowman for Crown Jewel, which we will talk about momentarily. Not what you would particularly call a stellar classic, but, this is at least effective for building up and ramping up excitement for seeing Strowman actually face off with the guy. And then, of course, the actual face-off happened, but, again, we will talk about that momentarily. Honestly, I kind of wish they would have just done that match on SmackDown and would have put the Ray Gunther match on the Crown Jewel show instead. Goddamn, what a match. It's really no secret at this point, but God, Gunther is so fluid. What a brilliant worker that guy is. I'm telling you, man, you give me unlimited funds and ask me to assemble my own roster of talents to push, out of any major wrestling company in the world right now, I am making Gunther my top heel champion, no question. Now, I'd probably change his name back to Walter again, because I kind of like Walter better than Gunther, but, the talent? Oh yeah, hell yeah. Give me that guy in a heartbeat. He is so good, dude. He's so good. He's always in the right place. Everything he does is executed so well. He's got the basics down packed. He's really mastered the art of milking the big moments. You could tell he's watched his old tapes from the territories because he never does more than what is absolutely necessary to get a match over. He doesn't need to do all the big flashy moves or the crowd-pleasing stunts to pop the crowd. He's all about fundamentals and the art of subtlety. This is an absolute perfect match for both parties. Ray's best attribute is working against the bigger guys and fighting from underneath. Gunther's a phenomenal, bully, mean, smug heel. They had the perfect layout here. Gunther just whipping and throwing Ray around for a good chunk of it. Of course, watching Gunther toss Ray around like a wet sandbag, it looks so much more reckless in how it ends up coming across in execution because he's so smooth with how he works. Taking their time, building to Ray's big comeback at the end. They kept the crowd invested. They were really into this thing from start to finish. Obviously we're sort of in the generation of wrestling now where the false finishes are really the only thing people pop for, if it's not directly the finish itself. Otherwise people are usually sitting on their hands for most of it, but they stayed with this. And they got the big series of false finishes at the end where Ray caught Gunther with a 619, tried to go for the frog splash, but Gunther rolled out of the way, ended up sitting Ray for a running drop kick in the corner. Looked like Ray just got shot out of a cannon with that buckle bump he took too. And of course, Gunther follows out with a massive powerbomb for a 2 count. People went ballistic for that. And they do this great finish where Ray tries one last time to hook Gunther into the ropes for a 619. Gunther immediately fires back off the ropes and decks Ray with a boot. And then he seemingly picks Ray from out of the air and finishes him off with that clothesline, pretty much knocks Ray's lights out. And of course, everyone booed because they all wanted Ray to win the belt. Not that anyone really believed for a second Ray was going to actually win this match. But it was a great TV main event. Gave Gunther a hell of a fight here. Like I said, I kind of wish they'd have booked this match for the Crown Jewel card. Would have given me something positive to talk about with that show. And speaking of the devil. All right. Crown Jewel. Well, when it comes to the Crown Jewel show, I've talked about for a few weeks now how I've gone back and forth with whether or not I wanted to even bother mentioning the show or talking about anything on the show. There really wasn't anything all that appealing to me on paper, unless you qualify appealing as seeing Braun Strowman and Omos actually try to pull off something resembling a pro wrestling match. Lashley and Lesnar was more enticing to me on paper 11 months ago when Lashley was actually a bigger deal and when he was actually featured as a main event guy. Then we actually saw the Lesnar-Lashley face-off in January, and that's about where that conversation ended. And then there was the Logan Paul-Roman Reigns thing, which, oh, it at least gave me something positive to take away with the show. Thank God I didn't actually try to sit back and watch the entire 3.5-hour card, elsewise I'd probably be less optimistic about it by the end. So I'll go over the stuff that I did watch, because it wasn't a lot, and then we'll spend the bulk of the report covering the main event. The opener I did watch, it was the Bobby Lashley-Brock Lesnar match, wherein most of the build-up was happening on Raw, so I pretty much went into this thing blind with no pre-match context, except for the video package they aired beforehand. And judging what they did on Raw to set this up in the match, it looked on paper like Lashley was supposed to be the babyface going into this thing, because Lesnar pretty much jumped him for no reason and then laid him out after returning to the show. And then by the time we actually got to the match, the fans were almost unanimously behind Lesnar and booed pretty much anything Lashley did. Probably because they booked Lashley to jump Lesnar before the bell and target his knee after he got rammed into the steps. So while Lesnar, the heel, is valiantly fighting from underneath and trying to make a comeback, surprise, surprise, the fans began rallying behind him. It also could be because Brock Lesnar is more interesting of a character than Bobby Lashley is at this point. So, of course, Brock took control eventually, and it was every Brock Lesnar match you have seen in the last 10 years. F5s, German suplexes, the whole 9 yards. I'll talk about the finish in a minute, but I don't know. The whole Brock Lesnar thing, you know, it's a shame because I was excited when he came back years ago and they immediately threw him into that program with Cena. You know, it was the right place and the right time for them to bring Lesnar back into the fold, especially with where WWE was around that point with building up top guys. You know, Cena, Orton, and Hunter were stale as fuck. They were really only at the point of trying to establish Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins, and they really just didn't have a lot of key main event players that felt fresh. And while I was a big fan of Brock during his first run in the WWE back in the mid-2000s, the second run really felt like the novelty wore off a lot sooner for me than expected. You know, pretty soon he just started doing the same match every time. They were really boring. Yeah, I hated that they spent the better part of 7 years trying to go back to the well with that fucking Roman Reigns program that no one wanted to see. At the end of the day, I've just kind of been over the whole Brock Lesnar thing for a long time now. Not to mention the period where he was the champion, but he wasn't actually on the show all that often. Pretty much ransacked their entire roster and fed them to Brock to the point where no one actually benefited from working with him. It's just a disaster. And like I noted before, you know, when they were announcing the Lashley-Lesnar match earlier this year, I was genuinely excited to see that because it was an actual dream match where someone was slated to face Brock in a program where I could actually buy them as legit challengers. You know, evidently the match ended up being disappointing because Brock reverted back to doing every Brock Lesnar match he's ever done in the last decade. Here they at least try to sell a different story with the way they booked the finish, and I kind of like that. It's like, yeah, Lesnar won, but you know, they booked it to where Lesnar reversed Lashley's hurt lock and used the corner buckle to fall back on Lashley to pin his shoulders down. So, you know, it's one of those instances where Lashley was seen as the more dominant guy, but Lesnar just managed to outsmart him in the end. But, you know, they went out of their way to make Lesnar look vulnerable. So, okay. You know, gives them a little more breathing room if the case they actually want to go down the road with a rubber match, which I'm not against necessarily. I really don't think the program has the same steam it did back in January when we were all kind of excited to see what would actually happen when they faced off in a match. Now that we've seen it, nah. I mean, they're not terrible matches or anything, but they're not particularly engaging either. And like I said, with the whole Bobby Lashley thing, he felt like a main event player earlier this year and even a little bit before that when he was the champion. I don't know, just he doesn't have that same appeal at this point. We'll see what they do. Like I said, they've been building this up on Raw, so I can only judge this match based on what they did here. It was short enough to where it didn't overstay its welcome, so I was glad about that. I personally think that they've kind of missed the boat on Lashley, but maybe that's just me. Then we had a girls' match where everyone was wearing full bodysuits, because Saudi Arabia. So that was the thing that happened. Dakota Kai and Io Shirai won the tag belts. Yippee skippy. The next match, however, I wanted to give a fair shake to. I don't know, I wouldn't even say I've been highly critical of Karrion Kross lately. I guess I've just been waiting for him to really blow me away with something on the main roster. I talked about this before. He stood out in NXT when he was the champion a couple years ago, but since they brought him back a few months ago, I don't know. There's just something that hasn't been clicking with a lot of Kross's segments. So I wanted to see if he could do something here to impress me in this cage match with Drew McIntyre. Guess I'll just have to keep waiting. I don't know. Maybe it was the cage environment. I've talked about it before, how I hate WWE's version of the escape the cage rules. I've always thought it was dumb, but yeah, I get it's just something they've done for a long time now. You kind of get accustomed to seeing it over the years. With Kross, though, man, I don't know what it is. He's a good worker. He does all the right things. He's got a decent look. He doesn't have the best physique in the world, and I still think he looked a lot better with the shaved head and the goatee. Honestly, maybe the problem is the fact that when you pair him with a guy like Drew McIntyre, who's obviously bigger and has a more badass look than Kross does, doesn't really do Karrion Kross any favors. It was a modern WWE style cage match with some incredibly stupid booking that I'll talk about in a minute. The fact that they can't do blood always kind of undermines the effect of these kinds of matches. But they worked hard. The crowd was definitely into McIntyre here. They generally seemed to enjoy the match. Probably the coolest thing they did was the superplex spot that McIntyre gave Kross off the top of the cage. It looked about as safe as you could possibly pull that off. Unfortunately, we've got to talk about some of the bad booking here. Really, we're talking about anything involving Scarlett, unfortunately. First, they do a spot where Drew is trying to escape the cage, and when he goes to open the door, Scarlett runs over and maces Drew in the face. Okay. Now we can talk about the logistics of using mace or a blinding spray in wrestling, how it should be done, and why the way they did it here was fucking retarded. But I'm not even getting hung up on the fact that they did a mace angle here and it was poorly done. I'm more so wondering, why in the hell would you do a mace angle to begin with and not have it directly lead to the finish? Because not only did the mace spot lead to Drew and Kross just doing more stuff, but Drew completely no-sold the mace less than a minute later so that he could pull Kross back into the ring as he was trying to escape through the door. How in the fuck do you shoot an angle where a guy gets blinded with a toxic spray and then less than a minute later he completely no-sells it and starts doing more shit? Seriously, I thought this was a rib. I thought they were going to blow off an angle at the end of the match where Drew would look at Scarlett and go, "Ha, surprise, you didn't get me, motherfucker." But I presume we were supposed to believe that Drew had real mace sprayed into his eyes. I mean, Scarlett didn't miss. She missed the fireball angle several weeks back, but I mean, I saw it plain as day. She clearly got Drew in the eyes with whatever it was supposed to be. So I couldn't make any logic out of that. I mean, they totally killed the Mace angle dead in the water. But it gets dumber because then we get the actual finish. Get this. Their genius finish to this cage match, with the referee out on the floor because Scarlett blinded him as well, they have Scarlett padlock Drew in the cage so she could steal the key. Because, you see, this would in turn mean that Drew is trapped in the cage with Karrion and not escape through the door. Even though, you know, there's a giant fucking hole at the top of the cage. And of course, Drew is standing there looking at Scarlett like an idiot for almost a full minute before looking up at the top of the cage and going, "Oh, what do you know? There's a big-ass hole up there for me to climb out of. Go figure." So Drew scales the cage. Scarlett proceeds to then unlock the cage so that Cross can try to escape through the door. And then Drew just climbs out of the cage and wins. And of course, Michael Cole is trying to explain the story to us, the viewers at home, like this was part of some backfiring plan on Scarlett's part as she tried to come up with a scheme to fuck over Drew in this match. No, I'm pretty sure the story is just Scarlett's an idiot. Really, I don't think anything else needs to be said. So yeah. I mean, the match was going along just fine until they tried to get way too overly cute with the booking. And, you know, going back to the Karrion Kross thing for a minute, maybe the Scarlett interference kind of helped paint the picture for why I'm just not getting a whole lot out of Kross right now. What is the purpose of Scarlett having to help Kross win in all of his matches? Why would a Karrion Kross need Scarlett to help him win when he's in jeopardy? I mean, if the goal is to make Kross a chicken shit heel, then okay. I think it's stupid to do that because it's counterproductive to what made Kross actually stand out as a monster heel once upon a time. But I've really only noticed that Scarlett's becoming a helping hand for Kross during his main roster booking. She may have gotten involved in his NXT matches a time or two, but I don't remember her being this involved. You know, most of the time she just stood there menacingly. I don't get how this is beneficial for Kross's character. And now with the story, based on what they did here, not only can Karrion Kross not win matches on his own, but even with the interference from his wife, he still ends up losing in the end. Maybe there's just something I'm not getting, but the booking of Karrion Kross continues to leave me dumbfounded. Unless Hunter has just lost the plot with him and he's already given up on trying to make him a thing, I have no idea. I really don't know how you rectify this character at this point. I mean, technically he's yet to be pinned or submitted, but quite frankly, by the end of this thing, I just think they made Kross look like an idiot. But again, maybe that's just me. So after that was an OC Judgment Day 6-man tag that I also skipped over. A, for time purposes, and B, getting me to sit through a Bald Brothers match is pretty much on par with the pain of jabbing a toothpick into my gums. And I'd honestly probably get more entertainment out of the toothpick. You know, plus there's the Judgment Day thing, and I've already talked about how I've kind of been over that faction since they randomly blacklisted Edge from the group months ago. So, I don't know. At least Dominic looks like he's having fun. But then it was time. It's time. It's time. It's not Vader time, unfortunately. I wish Vader was still alive to have partaken in this. Would have been a hell of a lot more interesting than the big man match we ended up getting. Omos versus Brawny the Strowman. Oh boy. Now, the real question is, was this as bad as I was teasing during the SmackDown report? Well, I mean, it wasn't good. It wasn't the train wreck I was anticipating, which actually kind of made it that much more disappointing. I was expecting a minus 5-star classic. It was more like minus 2.25. Actually, you want me to be blunt? Here's my entire set of notes for this match. And if you watched it live, let me know if I'm missing anything. Omos took about 98% of the match. Strowman sold and bumped forever. And then after Omos missed a running charge in the corner, Strowman scooped Omos up and hit him with a running power slam for the 3. Literally out of nowhere. That was the entire match. It was borderline bad, at best mid. As noted, I was expecting a sheer catastrophe when they first announced this, and it ended up exceeding my expectations, pretty notably, in fact. My hope is that we never have to speak or hear of this again. Hopefully this is a one-and-done ordeal to appease the Saudi crowd and give them something to the casual fans that they could sink their teeth into, but nothing that I really need to see extended as a long-term feud. Then they did the Usos Brawling Brutes match for the tag straps. And I was kind of torn on this because I've loved the stuff they've been doing with the Usos on SmackDown. The Bloodline story is great. Everyone's been phenomenal in that program from the beginning. But I've even mentioned this as far back as some of the earlier WWE Premium Live special reports we've done this year. The Usos as a team, it's just nearly impossible for me to really care about their matches at this stage. You know, we talk about guys that have been overexposed to death, guys that have been on television for so long now. It's like anytime you see them wrestle, you just can't get into anything they do. The Usos have been that way with me for a long time. I've seen their match. It's virtually the same thing every time. There's nothing new to say about it. You know, their stuff with Sammy is great. I can certainly sit back and watch them if they're interacting with Sammy as part of an angle or ongoing story on TV. But just watching an actual Usos match in a vacuum at this point, I'm over it. You know, I think a lot of people are too. You know, the Brawling Brutes, I've said before how I've enjoyed the stuff they did with Sheamus and Gunther as part of that little feud they were having over the IC title, but I wouldn't really say I'm a big fan of the Brawling Brutes trio. You know, Butch and Holland are good athletes, but this is another holdover from the Vince regime. They were always kind of a comedy act to begin with, and while they've made Butch a more serious character recently, or Pete Dunne to use his kayfabe Christian name, they're another team that I really can't get into all that much. Then you got the other problem where no one actually bought that the Usos were losing this match. There wasn't any real suspense to it, especially with Sammy not being there to run any distractions or advance any stories. So, it was a stereotypical Usos match circa 2022. I had it on in the background, but I wasn't really paying all that close attention. It's modern wrestling. You know, people pop for all the false finishes and the big moments, and that's all the match was built around for the most part. Near falls and false finishes. You know, I get it's sort of the appeal of the Usos match, since you've always got that lingering question in the back of your head of who's actually going to beat those guys for the belts down the road. So, you know, I think people will naturally be hooked in that domain. Me, though, I'm just sort of buying my time waiting to see how Sammy ends up fucking them over in the end. And again, without him actually present here, we didn't really have anything to advance in the Bloodline story. So I didn't even really have that. At least it wasn't the New Day. It's the biggest positive I can take away from it. At least it wasn't the New Day. So that was followed with another girls' match where they were also wearing full bodysuits. This time it was Bayley and Bianca Belair for one of the singles titles that the women's division has. And unfortunately, this one also involved weapons, to which I immediately said, "Oh, hell nah. I already saw one of those on SmackDown, and it was the drizzling shites. I don't need to be subjecting myself to another one of those. Even if it is Bianca and Bayley, who I've been fans of in the past. So I also fast-forwarded through this. Took me directly over to this Bray Wyatt segment, which is hard to believe that they actually flew Bray all the way to Saudi Arabia for this thing, but hey, more power to him if he wanted to do it. I mean, there really isn't anything to say about it that I already didn't discuss in the SmackDown report. I have no idea what this is building to. I have no idea what Bray's talking about or who this Uncle Howdy guy is. You know, people have been rumoring for a while that this is probably all leading to Bray Wyatt actually feuding with himself, which, I mean, I hate to actually say that I wouldn't put it past them to book something like that, but I mean, who even knows in this generation of wrestling? If you're going to push the envelope, you may as well go all in with it. Again, it'll probably suck in the end. I'm purposefully keeping my expectations low so that when it evidently does suck, I can just shrug my shoulders and move on from it. But I'm still going to watch it for the entertainment factor. I still think the guy's incredibly talented, and he's really trying to make this thing work. You know, I know the people are behind him. They love them some Bray Wyatt. So, cool, man. Keep riding that train until it goes barreling off the cliff. That's all I can say about it. But then came the time for us to talk about the main event. The Universal title showdown between Logan Paul and Roman Reigns. There was always that part of me that suspected these two would be able to pull off something surprisingly good. Little did I know. Didn't think it was going to be this good. I'll tell you what. This was the absolute perfect celebrity match for this audience. Regardless of how fucked up the dynamics of the characters were when they were doing this in the States, they were able to completely flip that on a dime over in Saudi Arabia. I personally wish that I could nominate Roman Reigns for an Emmy. His ability to master timing and facials in the right moments, it's truly impeccable. Everything he does, from the taunts to the expressions, they're always on point. You know, even during lesser important moments of his matches where he's got chin locks applied and he's working Logan on the ground and he's still trash talking and yucking it up to the camera like a classic heel. And to think they postponed a Roman Reigns heel turn for the better part of 8 years. Good Lord. It worked so well for the story they were playing up here, too. Because the whole story from the onset was that Roman was underestimating Logan Paul, factoring in that he's only wrestled 2 matches in WWE prior to this. You know, Roman's been blowing all this off, all his fighting credentials, because he's the top G in the company. You know, why would he be breaking a sweat over a rookie punk who's only wrestled 2 matches before? So by the time he get here, and Logan's outmaneuvering and out-wrestling Roman with hip tosses and leapfrogs and all the basic stuff. Of course, Roman's selling of everything is fantastic. But Roman starts to get more and more anxious as he starts to realize, oh shit, you know, this guy can actually go. And it's all centered around whether or not Logan could land that one lucky knockout punch. The single kiss of death that would be the end of Roman's title reign. And if Roman was not prepped for it, it'd be over in a flash. But man, this works so well. Again, especially for this crowd. Like I said, if they would have tried this in the States, I highly doubt the crowd response would have been the same here. These people were so into Logan Paul. It was insane. I have no idea what kind of Middle Eastern following Logan has on social media, but it's got to be up there in numbers. Every single big move Logan did here, every single near fall he got on Roman in this match, these people were into everything that guy did. They actually bought Logan was beating Roman for the title here. How in the world that is humanly possible, I have no idea. And I guess while we're on the subject of putting him over, Logan Paul in the ring, man. I mean, he's a hell of an athlete. I still think Pat McAfee hasn't beat in terms of great celebrity matches this year, but Logan's definitely given him a run for his money lately. You know, the fact that Logan was able to actually have a match with The Miz earlier this year and have it be that damn good, it's really saying something. But I really can't complain about a lot of what Logan does. His basics are good. His timing's good. His selling's good. He knows how to milk the crowd responses and build excitement for key moments in his matches. He's shown a lot more promise than 90% of AEW's roster in the last 3 years. And Logan's had less matches than I have fingers on one hand. You know, the other thing, too, is you can tell Logan actually respects the business, and that's a good sign. You know, as far as any of the stuff they did here, I mean, we could go into logistics if we wanted to, but it was all building to the big lucky punch at the end. And when Logan cold-cocked Roman with that straight right and then hit him with the Superman punch, it's one of the longest near falls we've ever experienced all year. Got people leaping up and down in their seats when Logan went for that cover. It was unbelievable. And of course, we didn't even mention Paul Heyman. His facials and overselling of everything on the floor, that was peak Paul Lee. Anytime Roman was in trouble, you got Paul going, "Rise, my tribal chief, rise!" God, he's such a slime ball. I love him. Now, of course, they had the smoke and mirrors a bunch of stuff at the end for entertainment value. After Logan gave Roman the elbow drop through the announce table while taking a selfie, which might have been the first in wrestling. Actually, I don't think it was a selfie. I think he was actually live streaming it, wasn't he? Hopefully someone actually uploads that original video to YouTube somewhere. And while Logan and Roman are selling on the floor, they got the Usos coming out to get into a brawl with Logan's, friends, I guess. I wanted to say entourage, but I don't know. It looked like they were just friends that he flew into the country so they could sit ringside to watch the match. But anyway, the Usos kicked the shit out of them. And that was a setup so that Jake Paul could make his way down to knock the Usos out with stereo punches. Oddly convenient how he also had theme music. But guess we can look past that little quirky detail. And that was followed with Logan giving Roman a big frog splash for another near fall. Followed by Solo Sikoa coming out to try and get physical with Jake down at ringside. And a bunch of backstage hands ran out to separate them. Which then led to Logan giving the Usos a dive. Also looked like he may have injured one of them on the landing. I think it was Jimmy who was grabbing at the right shoulder on the landing, so hopefully he was all right because it didn't look good. And with all this bullcrap going outside the ring, when Logan got back in the ring, Roman immediately capitalized, Superman punch, spear, 1, 2, 3. So the reign continues. No pun intended there. Like I said, man, hats off to these two. I know Logan's only had 3 matches in WWE, but he shows more promise than virtually any young rookie in the business today. I guess not named MJF. You know, the problem with that is when you realize Logan Paul isn't so much an actual wrestler, but more so in the celebrity domain. It's kind of telling where we are in the business today when it comes to actually building up potential stars. You know, that a YouTube celebrity shows more promise than most of the boys that have spent years on the indie circuit actually wrestling. I mean, even if the indie circuit is a clown show to begin with, it's still kind of disappointing. But Logan Paul shows more potential than a lot of those guys do. No question. I hope he stays with it, because the more I see of him, the more I'm impressed. Again, I don't think the average smart fan actually expected Roman to lose the strap here, but the people were hooked, and they stayed invested into this thing from start to finish. It's one of those realizations that when they actually have someone beat Roman for the belt, man, the pop for that is going to be electric. I just hope they do it with the right guy. Anyway, when it comes to the show, I'm sort of evaluating it as a one-match show. Obviously, I did not actually watch the entire 3.5 hours, so it wasn't an entire afternoon wasted. But it's definitely worth going out of your way to check out the main event. Everything else I saw was just kind of there, if I'm being honest. I wasn't all that thrilled with the booking of the cage match, but I mean, it wasn't a bad match by any means. I don't know. I mean, I'll say this. I'm more intrigued with WWE's product right now than I am AEW's. A lot of that has to do with anything going on with the Bloodline story. Would I recommend you go out of your way to sit down and watch the show or kill yourself, giving yourself free time to do so? Not really, no. There weren't any blowaway matches or anything like that. I honestly wouldn't really even throw the Roman-Logan match on my matches of the year list. It was definitely the best match of the show. But I don't know. Definitely not in the top 20 matches of the year or anything like that. Overbooking at the end being accounted for, too. Looking back, I was more so just surprised that the people were actually into Logan Paul as a babyface. I never would have expected that based on the way that people have been receiving him on SmackDown. Anyway, I think that about covers everything I wanted to for the show here. Again, a very WWE central podcast for the Monday show, but that's all good. We're still a couple weeks out from the AEW Full Gear show, so that'll be the next big extravaganza to look forward to for the weekend. If you did check out the Saudi Arabia Crown Jewel show, feel free to chime in and let me know what you thought of it. But we will be back for the Friday podcast, where we will get back to both of the retro review shows we've been doing. And whatever AEW decides to throw at us, because that's kind of Tony Khan's booking mentality, throw shit at the wall every week, hope it sticks. I'm sure we'll have about 1,800 surprises and zero follow-up from anything that happened the previous week. But I guess we'll look forward to it this coming Wednesday night. Anyway, take care all. Peace out.